We are finishing up our five-part series called Redemptive Relating. It's built around 5 prepositions, and the premise of the series is how does God relate to us, and therefore how are we to relate to others? And we're using 5 prepositions. God is with us was our first week. What does it mean to be with people? God is for us, which we just sang about. What does it mean to be for people? God moves toward us. What does it mean to move toward people with initiative? Last week we looked at God is in us, and what does that mean to join people in their inner story particularly? And then we looked today is the last preposition, up, and God is trying to drive us up towards Him, and at the same time to take God-given longings that He places in our hearts at conversion, new inclinations that we'd never had before. He places them deep in our hearts, but they're hard for us to really access or really even know that they're there. And yet, but God is trying to awaken those, stir those up in our hearts, and He often uses people to do that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. In your handout, this is just in a short couple sentences, the sermon today. God relates to us to elevate our hearts up to Him as first priority and first love. This is going on every day, all through the course of our life while we are here. This is what He's doing. We powerfully relate to others when we help awaken someone's hidden desires to know God and live for Him above anything else. This is when relationships are at their best, when we come alongside of people and we enter into their inner world, and we are looking, I think of this as the ministry of the highlighter. We are trying, as we listen for people's stories, when we're asking the question, what is God doing? What is He building in them? Oftentimes, they can't see what you see. This is true for me. There are a number of people in our church that see things in me that are really hard for me to see. And what this kind of relating is somebody takes out a highlighter and they highlight something that's being built in your heart. Maybe you can't see, but they can see. And that is powerful stuff. It helps us to move forward. So the question is, what traits is God building in His people? Well, there are a long list of things, but the things that strike me is He's trying to build us to where we love Him with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Matthew 22, 37 through 39, that we love others in the same way that we've been loved. The desire to honor God with our life. That our life would reflect something of Christ-like character is another piece of this. That our commitment to Him deepens, that we are willing to sacrifice and to give for the sake of His kingdom and for His people. All these things are things that God is putting in us. Now, He does want us to be more righteous, but it's my opinion that before we become more righteous, what has to happen is to be awakened to a greater hunger for righteousness and a greater thirst for righteousness to be like Him. And then to have a hatred for sin, a growing hatred for sin. It's not that any of these things are permanent or the finish lines, but these are the processes or the steps along the way that God is trying to build into us. Now, there are a few examples that I have in the Scriptures. We'll look at this. But as we look at these verses, there's a very important thing I'd like to highlight, and that is a paradox. Being a Christian is very paradoxical. And it would seem like the things that discourage you and where you would feel like a failure because you're not measuring up, God is doing something beneath that failure to awaken something in you. So let's take the first example, Isaiah 55:1, where God says, "Come, all you who are thirsty, come to the waters." He's talking about that which would satisfy us. "You who have no money, come, buy and eat. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without cost." This is the invitation to come to approach God and to be with Him. Now, it's interesting to me that in this verse, He mentions the word come 4 times. Now, why would that be? Why would He need to say come to us 4 times? Come to me, He says, come. Well, simply because we would rather go somewhere else than rather come to Him. And all of our lives at different times, we are pursuing all kinds of different things we think will satisfy us, and we are sure they will satisfy us. But in the final analysis, when we chase those things to the end, we find out some very discouraging things. We find out that we end up with more emptiness when we were chasing something that wasn't him first. Or we may feel a sense of loneliness or a sense of misery that we bring upon ourselves or we bring upon other people, or a sense of failure. And then he says, come buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Sometimes we have spent money to find that satisfaction that we hope we will find. And when it's all said and done, it really didn't work like we thought. And then he says, come buy without money and without cost. And here I think what he means is personal cost. Personal cost. Here, what we end up chasing, we end up with a sense of failure or sense of futility. It's just not enough. And God says, I know that. Come to me, you who hunger and thirst. Now, how do we get to the point where we come to him and we hunger and thirst? We come paradoxically through our failure and through our emptiness and through our loneliness and through misery. He's used the last one that we look to for our satisfaction. So you may feel along the way, I'm just such a spiritual failure. I'm just such a loser. You are on the right road to what we will see in a minute is the road to blessing. This is part of what it means to grow as a Christian. This is part of our process. I just feel like such a failure. Welcome to the club. You are on the right road of giving up all the other things that we thought would make us happy for him. Verse 2, why spend money on what is not bread and your labor on what does not satisfy? And the same idea here. There are lots of things we think will satisfy us. But when we finally have come to the end of that road and we thought we could find that satisfaction other than in God himself, what do we end up with? A sense of futility or a sense of failure or a sense of emptiness or a sense of loneliness or maybe a sense of misery. What am I doing is the question. And then at that point you may think, I just feel like such a spiritual failure, such a spiritual loser. And this is the wonderful paradox. It is that point at which God, when he says to us, come, we say, yes, sir, I'm coming. There's nowhere else to go. Listen, he says, listen to me, eat what is good. You will delight in the richest of fare. Verse 3, give ear and come to me, listen that you may live. And here's another just great example. 3 times he says to us, listen. One of them he says, listen to me. And the fourth one he says, give ear. Now, why is that true? Because we would rather listen to almost anything, the siren song of our desires, the siren song of our longings and our feelings. But when we pursue those, we end up at the same dead end of a sense of failure or futility or emptiness or loneliness or a sense of misery or a combination of those things. How do we learn to listen? Through the door of failure. I keep knocking my head against that same brick wall and keep coming up with the same conclusion. We say, when will we ever learn? Well, eventually our head hurts so much that we finally do start to learn. The paradox, Psalm 37:4, take delight in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, like the morning sun. And how do we learn to delight in God? Well, through the paradox of delighting in seemingly anything and everything else and ending up in the same cul-de-sac we always end up with a sense of failure or futility or emptiness or loneliness or misery. And we finally say, what am I doing? What am I doing? And when we delight in anything else other than him, that's where we're going to end up. It's finally through our sense of failure that we say, oh, God, of course I want to delight in you. I've tried virtually everything else. And this starts to become real to us. The desire to delight in him is already in your heart and my heart as Christians. But we're not aware of it until we have hit bottom so many times that it then becomes awakened to us, and it's helped by other people who can see that. In the Beatitudes, this paradox is really obvious. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Poor in spirit means to be humble. Now, we aren't humble as people because we read some good verses on humility and say, I need to be humble. That does happen. But the way that we really become humble is when we've been humbled so often by the world and by our efforts that we begin to hate our pride. And then humility, instead of being like one of those, oh, okay, I need to be humble, becomes something that we gravitate to. We want to be humble. There's something in us deepest that is awakened to this. And he says, blessed are these folks, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And this is the amazing paradox of this. Is humility may seem, when you're humbled, it may seem like a failure or a spiritual loser, but in reality, you are on the road to blessing, Jesus says. Same idea is in verse 4. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And mourning here particularly means mourning over my sin. Becoming so sickened over my continuing sin, and I keep making the same mistakes over and over again, that I begin to mourn over this. You may think, it may feel like I'm a spiritual failure, I'm a spiritual loser, but Jesus says, you are on the road to blessing. Verse 5, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Meek means that we have given our expectations over to God. Our expectations of Him, our expectations of people, and our expectations of ourselves. Now, it may seem like, I guess I shouldn't want anything, is how it may sometimes feel. But when we give our expectations to God, Jesus would say, you are on the road to blessing. It may not feel that way, but you're on that road. And then verse 6, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. It's fascinating to me. He doesn't say, blessed are those who are righteous. That's not the standard. It's just hunger, thirst. I want to be more righteous than I am. I have a thirst for that. That's what's highlighted. As we relate to other people, when you sense that in somebody, you take out your little yellow highlighter and you put words to that. That's powerful stuff. And then Proverbs 8:13, the fear of the Lord is to hate evil. I hate pride and arrogance. How do we come to a place where we hate evil? Well, we can read verses about it like this one, but that's really not how we come to hate evil. We come to hate evil because when it seems to defeat us over and over and over and over again. And we make the same stupid mistakes again and again and again. And when we finally come to a place where I hate the person that I keep moving towards, I want to be somebody different. And Jesus would say to us, you're on the road to blessing. It's through this paradoxical door of failure that we may think, I just don't think I'm going to be a very good Christian. That's the very doorway towards progress. This is one of those amazing things. So as you're talking to somebody and they feel like a spiritual failure, you want to be asking yourself, what's going on in their heart? What's God trying to awaken here? What deeper longings am I hearing in this person that you can highlight to? Now, on the inside of your handout, there's a really interesting verse, and I hope that you will gravitate towards this and see that you qualify. Proverbs 20, verse 5. The purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out. What we're talking about here is the deeper inclinations and desires that God puts in the Christian that we may not even be aware of. But as you're talking to this person, you sense there's something going on in them that you like. And what Proverbs says here is you have a chance to bring those things out of the deep waters of their heart and put them out in the light of day for the person to see. Oh, I see what God is doing in my life here. I think you're right. Now, I love to watch shows about nature, and when I think about deep waters, I mean, I am terrified of deep water. The idea of going lobster hunting at 60 feet below is just like, I'm never going to be doing that, I hope. When I first started doing triathlons, even just the little mini ones, it's a 500-yard swim in a lake, I was just sure that even though there were 300 people swimming in front of me, that lurking about 20 feet down behind me was about a 12-foot fish that was just waiting to cull me out of the pack and then come again. Now, I am not being facetious. I dealt with this and dealt with this, and it took me about 4 or 5 races to finally deal with this. Well, that's sort of that image here. A man of understanding draws them out. Now, who is a man of understanding or a woman of understanding? Well, I think it's the person who has just some understanding about regular theology, about God and about who we are as people, and understands something of how people open up or they don't open up. As we will see, this is not rocket science. There's a few simple things that you can do to be a person of understanding. Okay, so what are some things I can do? Relating to another person with up in mind. And there are 3 things that I just want to put in front of you. Hearing someone's inner story. You want to hear somebody's inner story. James 1:19, my brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to become angry. Now, as you're talking to people, oftentimes we begin talking about our outer story, about what's happening in our life, what's happening in your life. But if you're going to be a person of understanding, you also want to be thinking about what's going on in somebody's inner life. Maybe they haven't shared with you hardly any of this. But you want to become curious of this. He says, quick to listen and slow to speak. I think the reason he says that here is that all of us have an urge to jump in too quickly when we hear somebody's inner story. And virtually every time, I do not resist that urge to jump in too quickly. About 15 seconds later, I think, Seth, you just capped the level of this conversation right here, and this person is not going to go any deeper. Maybe another conversation they will. But we just have this urge to want to fix something or give advice or tell a story or something that just caps the conversation. It's just not going to go any lower there. Now, what's the tool of listening here? It's not just listening, but it's curiosity. If you are curious about somebody's inner story and you're asking questions about what's going on inside of them, the natural thing that you're going to sense is the need to listen, to ask questions and to listen. So that's number 1. The second one is what the Bible calls pondering and considering. Either one of these you can pick, pondering or considering. Proverbs 18:13, if anyone gives answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. So we tend to jump in too early and say something, give advice, before we've really heard somebody, their inner story. We finish their sentences and what we think they're saying, and Solomon would say the conversation is going to go no deeper when you do that. You just put a cap on it. Proverbs 15:28 says, the mind of the righteous ponders how to answer. The mind of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. And the idea here is, as somebody is sharing, rather than being quick to say something, your mind should be engaged not on what you think you should say, but pondering what they are saying, or what they're not saying, or what they might want to say. You are pondering. Hebrews 10:24 has the same idea, except it uses the word consider. Let us consider how to stir one another up to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the days you see the day approaching. Consider is the same as ponder, which is point number 2, and then stir up, which is point number 3. But consider, so what does that mean? Well, the Greek word means to diligently and analytically reflect, or to ponder is the idea. And the opposite of this is to give advice or to speak too soon, or we often throw out a Christian cliche or a truth or something that, maybe your pastor or somebody on radio said that sounds good to you. That's not how this happens. This happens through you pondering, considering what's going on inside. Now, how does this happen? Well, in your handout on page 3, there's some questions that are the kinds of things that you want to be asking yourself as the person is talking. You're not going to ask all these questions, but if you're asking a couple of these, then you're going to have a chance to deepen the conversation, help them to open up more. So, what is going on deeper in my friend? That's just a question you're going to ask yourself. And you're going to be asking God, what's stirring up in here? Second, what inner battles is he or she waging that maybe they're not telling you about? But you're a human being, and as you hear their story, it might resonate with you a battle or two you would have if you were sharing what this person shared. A third question is, what stirs in me as he or she shares his or her story? What's something that stirs in me? What resonates with me? What do I long for that's similar to what I hear from my friend? What does God seem to be shaping in my friend? Maybe that they can't see. What deeper desires is God awakening? That they may not be able to see. And then the curiosity question, about what are you more curious? What else would you like to know? What does he wish would be different about his response to his challenge? If you had this is the magic wand question. If you had a magic wand, what do you wish would happen? Or what do you wish would be different for you? Now, none of these things are suggestive questions. You are not the teacher, and this is not the student. You are the friend, and they are the friend. Your questions may not be what resonates with them. What resonates with you may not resonate with. Fine. You're just trying to get closer to what is going on inside of their soul that you can speak with. So that's pondering and considering. You listen with curiosity, you ponder and consider. And then this third one is what Hebrews calls stir up. Stir up. Let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Now, the word stir up means to awaken. And it's a great image here of what's going on in the soul of another Christian. Sometimes the desires and longings God has put in them need you, by asking questions and listening, where they themselves awaken to what's true of them, that hitherto they have not been able to see. This is just magical. It's not you're telling them something. They're realizing something. The Greek word also means paroxysm, which is a word that we don't use very often. But it's sort of like there's a big explosion that happens. Here, an explosion of awareness. The idea is, if somebody realizes something about themselves first, that's going to be much more real to them than if you tell them that. And what you're trying to do is not provide extrinsic motivation for them, like guilt and pressure. You're trying to help them find internal motivation to want to reflect these desires and their longings that God has put in their life on a go-forward basis. This is what it means to stir up. Now, let's just take a case study. This is from the Apostle Paul. How would you respond to Paul's inner story? So this comes from 2 Corinthians chapter 1. And he's sharing some things with the people of Corinth in this letter. And imagine that you are sitting across from Paul having breakfast. And he starts off the conversation with these three things. 2 Corinthians 1:8. We don't want you to be uninformed, brothers, about now one of the things to listen for when you're listening with curiosity, listen for particular words. Words that have a grip to them. Or words that when somebody says that word, there's some emotion to it. Those are really, really important clues to pursue. So, we don't want you to be uninformed, brothers, about the hardships. In my mind, that's a word. I may come back to that. We suffered, that's a definite word, maybe to come back to, in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure. Not just pressure, great pressure, another clue word there. Far beyond our ability to endure. Ooh, bingo, bingo, bingo. So that we despaired even of life. These are all rich words and rich phrases. And you can start with any of these and begin to, as you're listening and asking questions. Indeed, in our hearts, we felt the sentence of death. Now, all too often, for us as Christians, we might say something incredibly stupid like, well, you shouldn't feel that way. Or is that how it really was? Well, what happened to your faith? That is, I think Satan would be saying things like that to the Apostle Paul at this point. So again, think about this. As you hear Paul saying these words, you are listening with curiosity, and you are asking yourself some of these questions. When we suffered in the province of Asia, I might ask, well, I know something of what you suffered outwardly, beatings and whippings, run out of town. But I hear something also internal. Is that true? Was there a suffering in your soul that went on? Where does your mind go with that? I may not be anywhere near where you are, but it was something along that line there? As you look back on that, we suffered. We were under great pressure. What was that like? How did you feel when that happened? What did you want to do? This is not rocket science. You're asking open-ended questions to help give them a place of safety to go a little deeper. Far beyond our ability to endure. What was that like? I can't imagine that. What was that like for you? What did you want to do? We despaired even of life. What was that like? You're just helping people unpack these different words they're saying. In our hearts, we felt the sentence of death. What a great phrase. A death sentence. What was that like? Now, at this point, there are things that you can put words to, and there are images that you can put out there to people that can be helpful to people. So in this particular case with Paul, if I was sitting across from him, and I might say something like, what strikes me is there's a determination that God has put in you that just refuses to quit. Do you resonate with that? That's what I hear. That's what I see. Or what might resonate with me is, Paul, I'm just astounded by the deep desire to honor God no matter what cost you have to pay. And that inspires me. There's something about that draws me. I want to be more like that man, like you are. Or, I hear a man of God here that I don't know if I could have been like you were in this situation. But there's something in me that's drawn to want to be that kind of man. This is relating up. You're helping a person see what's down in their soul, what he is awakening to bring to the surface for them, and just putting words to this. This may sound crazy, Paul, but when I think about what you're describing here, our world would say, God isn't good. but I have a feeling that you would say God is good even through all this. Is that right? And if he says yes, how? And let him put words to this. Now, those are just sort of off-the-cuff examples of how this kind of conversation happens. It's not rocket science. Listening with curiosity, consider or ponder, and then what stirs in you that you can stir up in someone else. Okay. Well, Paul finishes this breakfast, so we'll put after hitting the pause button, we'll hit the play button again. He says, this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. Now, what Paul tells us here is this is one of the things God was doing. Now, I might have guessed that, or I might have asked a question, or I might have completely missed that. But Paul tells us, this is what I saw God doing in my life, that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. Verse 10, he has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. Again, he's sort of telling you now, and if I was sitting there, I would be thinking, I wish I had thought of that, and had asked some questions to help bring that out. On him we have set our hope. Ding, 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 ding. That he will continue to deliver us. As you help us by your prayers, then many will give thanks on our behalf for the gracious favor granted us. Answer to the prayers of many. Gracious favor. The goodness of God. So, listen with curiosity. Ponder. Consider what you're hearing. What resonates. What stirs in you as you hear this person's story. And then take out your highlighter. What do you hear? Or maybe what you hear, you're going to ask in the form of a question. This is up. It's my opinion that any Christian can do this. People in our country pay lots of money to go to counselors. And there's a place for professional counselors. But there was a study done years and years ago that really encouraged me. And the statistics are something like this. That 25% of those who went to a professional counselor that had a PhD in clinical psychology, 25% of those people were helped. 35% of people who had a PhD in counseling, in general, about 35% of the people who went to them were helped. People that had a college or a master's degree in counseling, about 55% of the people that went to them were helped. About 65% of people that went to a pastor were helped. And about 75% of people that went to a trusted friend with some wisdom were helped. Now, what our culture loves to assume is that education is what's most important. What the Bible would say is understanding is most important. And this God has given to every one of us who are Christians. Let's pray together. Father, I am struck by people who have done up with me. And I can think about Harold, and I think about Larry. I think about people in our church now. Richard, Allie, Janice, Lance. Just a name right off the top of my head. People who have related to me in this way. And have helped me see something about myself and what you're doing in me that is really hard for me to see. And Jane, again, something hard for me to see. And Mindy, something hard for me to see. And your people, you have put in our hearts an inclination to want to do this for other people. And it is there, whether we're aware of it or not. But would you awaken this within us and help us to be a people who come alongside of the people around us in our lives, not as a counselor or a fix-it person, but simply as a friend, with some very simple tools to listen with curiosity, to consider and ponder what we hear, and then to begin to ask questions with the hope of stirring up something in our friend. Father, would you help us to get a vision of this and help us to see ourselves, each one of us, as your people, with these simple tools in our hands and the Spirit of God working in us and through us and in the person that we're talking to have redemptive conversations, helping us move towards you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.